Darkness swallowed the colony of Velos. 3, as the sirens wailed, a mechanical scream echoing through the city's crumbling streets. Fires burned in the distance, casting violent shadows against the steel towers. The Galactic Empire's forces had come, and with them, death followed. From the highest balcony of his home, Elias Kane, a boy of barely 8, clutched his mother's hand. Below, armored soldiers moved in unison, their rifles glowing red-hot from the slaughter. They were methodical, efficient. There were no warnings, no hesitation. His mother, Celine, pulled him close. "Don't let go," she whispered. They ran. Blaster fire tore through the walls beside them, sending a shower of molten debris across the corridor. Celine stumbled, but never released Elias's hand. The spaceport was too far. Escape was impossible. Still, she pushed forward, her breath sharp with panic. The main door burst inward, metal shrieking. A towering figure stepped inside. General Kale Draven, his black armor streaked with the blood of the fallen. His eyes cold and unfeeling, swept the room like a predator surveying his kill. "Take them." Elias screamed as rough hands dragged him from his mother's grasp. Celine fought, her fists colliding with armor, nails clawing at flesh, teeth sinking into flesh. It didn't matter. A soldier's rifle swung upward, the butt crashed against her skull. She crumpled. Draven knelt beside the trembling boy. "Darius Kane will hear of this," he mused, "and when he does, he'll come, but not in time." The rifle rose again. A single shot. Elias Kane fell lifeless beside his mother. Light years away, Darius Kane watched the transmission in silence. His breath was steady, unnaturally calm, as if his body refused to acknowledge the horror unraveling before him. The Empire had made a mistake. He replayed the footage, forcing himself to absorb every second. The way Celine fought despite the odds, how Elias had clung to her until the end. He memorized the faces of their killers. Every soldier, every officer. Draven. The transmission ended. The screen went black, yet the image burned into his mind. A voice crackled through his ship's comms. "Captain Voss." "Darius," he said carefully. "Don't do anything reckless." Reckless? No, this was something else. Darius stood. His movements were deliberate, precise, the same way he had handled a sniper rifle in his past life. A life he had left behind. The war against the Empire had been lost years ago, and he had traded vengeance for peace. A family, a future, and the Empire had stolen it all. He crossed the small cabin, entering a chamber locked for years. The retinal scanner hummed, then hissed as the doors unsealed. His past lay waiting. Inside, his sniper rifle rested against a far wall. Eclipse, the sleek matte black weapon, had ended wars, taken kings, silenced fleets. It had been the Empire's greatest nightmare. And now it would be again. He lifted it, feeling the familiar weight settle against his shoulder. His hands, steady as they had always been, ran over the modifications. Hypercooled barrel, smart targeting, zero-gravity stabilization. This wasn't just a rifle. It was an executioner. The comm buzzed again. Voss sighed. "Where are you going?" Darius fastened the last of his armor. "Hunting." There was no need for dramatic declarations. The Empire had called him back to war. They just didn't know it yet. The void stretched endlessly before him, a silent abyss broken only by the distant glow of dying stars. Darius Kane sat motionless in the cockpit of his stealth frigate, the Oblivion, watching the Galactic Empire's transmissions flood the holofeed. Wanted Darius Kane, former sniper, ex-commander, enemy of the state. Dead or alive. Reward, 2 million credits. His name, once a ghost in forgotten war records, was now a declaration of war. The message ended, replaced by a live broadcast from Admiral Rithos, one of the Empire's most ruthless commanders. The reptilian officer stood aboard his command vessel, the Obsidian Wrath, his slitted eyes scanning the cameras with quiet menace. "General Kale Draven is dead," Rithos stated, "murdered in cold blood by a traitor who thinks himself untouchable." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "He is wrong. The Empire is watching. The Empire never sleeps. And the man who dares to stand against us will not live to regret it. Darius allowed himself the ghost of a smile. The Empire feared him. Good. He leaned back, flexing his fingers over the controls. The hunt had begun, and he already had his next target, Admiral Rithos himself. The Empire would expect him to run. They always did. But Darius Kane never ran. He opened a secured comm channel. Voss. Static crackled before Captain Voss's voice cut through. You just made my life a lot harder, Kane. You have something for me? A sigh. Rithos is aboard the Obsidian Wrath, currently in low orbit over Kareth Prime. High security, full fleet escort. You can't just snipe him from a rooftop this time. Darius adjusted the targeting module on Eclipse. I won't need a rooftop. Voss hesitated. You're planning something reckless. I'm planning something final. A long silence. Then I'll get you clearance codes. One-time use. If you screw this up, you won't get another chance. Darius ended the call. One chance was all he needed. Hours later, the Oblivion drifted through the Empire's security perimeter, silent as death. The clearance codes held. No alarms. No scans. A perfect infiltration. Inside his armor, his pulse remained steady. His rifle lay secured across his back, its weight an old comfort. The plan was simple. Board the ship. Kill Rithos. Leave nothing behind. But plans rarely survived first contact. The docking bay of the Obsidian Wrath loomed ahead. As his ship touched down, Darius exhaled slowly. It was time. The corridors of the Obsidian Wrath pulsed with cold, artificial light, their metallic walls humming with the energy of a warship at full readiness. Darius Kane moved like a shadow, his footfalls absorbed by the stealth plating of his boots. Every movement was calculated, precise. He had studied this ship's schematics for hours. He knew its blind spots, its structural weaknesses, and, most importantly, its most vulnerable throat to cut. Admiral Rithos was aboard, surrounded by elite Imperial guards, but Darius had already chosen his vantage point. The upper catwalks of the command deck offered a perfect line of sight. He positioned himself above the grand observation platform where Rithos stood, addressing a room of high-ranking officers. A single shot, one kill. The war would begin and end here. He settled, Eclipse against the railing, adjusted the scope, and exhaled. The moment stretched into eternity. His finger tightened against the trigger. A sudden blare of alarms shattered the silence. Intruder alert. Darius cursed, shifting position as blast doors slammed shut across the ship. A dozen red targeting lasers converged on his position. He rolled away an instant before the first barrage of blaster fire melted through the metal where he had stood. They had been waiting for him. He landed on his feet, drawing his sidearm as the first soldier rushed through the door. 2 shots, center mass. The body crumpled before hitting the floor. Another came, firing wild. Darius dropped low, a single bullet tearing through the man's throat. But there were too many. A concussive blast slammed into his chest plate, throwing him backward into the railing. His vision flickered. He had seconds before they overwhelmed him. A voice crackled through the ship's intercom. Admiral Rithos, I commend your courage, Kane, but you should have stayed dead. Darius forced himself to his feet. You talk too much. He activated his detonator. Throughout the ship, a dozen pre-placed explosives erupted in succession. Shock waves rippled through the hull. Fires ignited. The ship lurched violently as power flickered. The chaos gave him the opening he needed. He sprinted, weaving through collapsing structures as sirens blared. The Empire's soldiers, dazed and disoriented, fell back to defensive positions. Darius moved the other way, toward Rithos. His body ached, his breath came ragged, but his purpose burned hotter than pain. Rithos would not escape him. Not now. Not ever. The ship was dying. Fire raged through the corridors, and the deck beneath Darius Kane trembled as the hull groaned under the strain of the explosions. Smoke choked the air, alarms blared in warning, and distant screams of wounded soldiers filled the void. None of it mattered. His focus remained on the only thing that did, Admiral Rithos. Through the chaos, Darius moved with unshaken precision, his sniper rifle slung over his back, his sidearm gripped tight. The command bridge was close. Rithos wouldn't flee. He was too arrogant for that. The admiral would stand his ground, believing himself untouchable. Darius intended to prove him wrong. He slid into cover as a squad of Imperial troopers turned the corner, their rifles sweeping the hallway. Before they could react, Darius was already moving. A controlled burst from his pistol sent two of them sprawling, armor smoking where the rounds had found weak points. The last raised his weapon, but Darius was faster. A single shot to the throat silenced him before he could call for backup. The blast doors to the bridge loomed ahead, sealed tight. Security protocols would be engaged, locking it down, but Darius had planned for this. He pulled a small device from his belt, a signal disruptor, and pressed it against the control panel. Sparks flared as the override engaged. A second later, the heavy doors groaned open. Inside, the bridge was a battlefield. Officers scrambled to regain control of the crippled warship, smoke pouring from shattered consoles. And at the center of it all stood Admiral Rithos. The reptilian officer turned as Darius entered, his slitted eyes narrowing. "You're persistent," he said, voice calm despite the destruction around him. Darius leveled his rifle, his aim unwavering. "And you're dead." Rithos smirked. "No, Kane. I win." The floor beneath Darius erupted. The force of the explosion launched him backward, pain lancing through his side as he hit the deck. His ears rang, his vision blurred, and through the haze he saw Rithos standing over him, a blaster aimed at his head. "You think you're the first man who's wanted revenge," the Admiral sneered. "You think you're the first to come for me? You're nothing, Kane. A relic of a lost war." Darius coughed, tasting blood. His body screamed in protest, but his mind remained sharp. He wasn't done yet. "You're right," he rasped. "I'm not the first." His hand tightened around the detonator still clutched in his palm. "But I'm the last." He pressed the trigger. The final explosive, buried deep within the ship's reactor core, detonated with a force that tore through the bridge like the wrath of a dying god. The blast consumed the consoles, shattered the observation windows, and sent bodies hurtling into the vacuum beyond. Darius, already moving, grabbed the railing as the ship began to break apart. Rithos wasn't as lucky. The Admiral, caught in the blast wave, was flung from the deck, his body snatched by the void. For a brief moment, silence reigned. Darius pulled himself to his feet, flames reflecting in his visor. He had won. The Empire had bled tonight. With a final glance at the wreckage, he turned and disappeared into the smoke. The Obsidian Wrath was doomed, and soon it would be nothing but another grave in the cold embrace of space. As Darius escaped into the night, he allowed himself a whisper. "For my family,